The million dollar question: how do entrepreneurs transition from self-employed to owning a business that turns a profit? My name is Chris Waters, and this podcast has the million dollar answer. Welcome to CEO Secrets. Steven, welcome to CEO Secrets. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, man. Are you back at work and at your office, or are you still sheltering in place?
We're still sheltering in place. Fortunately for us, we've got most of my team is they were already working remote. So I'm out west. I'm in Colorado. How about yourself?
So yeah, we actually went like full steam ahead on Monday. So everybody's in the office working, and we're very lucky in Texas because the cases, per million or whatever is relatively low. So what part of
Yep.
Colorado are you in?
It's a town called Evergreen. It's just outside Denver. And we were previously, so our office was in Midtown, New York. And I literally just moved about probably 6 months ago. So we just dodged that bullet. New York was hit pretty bad. Got a couple guys in Brooklyn. They're healthy, but they said that things are still pretty quiet. They're not really opening too much up right now, except for the essential, but it's getting better, which is good.
Is that the Brooklyn Bridge behind you in the artwork?
That's it. Yeah. I think I gotta bring a little bit of New York with me.
What part of New York were you in?
So we were in Manhattan. We were in Midtown, right on Broadway, 52nd and Broadway.
How long did you live there?
We were there for about 3 years. And as I mentioned, most of my team is they're working all over the place, and figured I had gone to school out here down in Denver, and brought my wife out and said, hey, we could basically open up shop out here as well. Another reason actually though that we moved is because in New York there's something called the BIT license, and what that means is if you want to deal in crypto, and you probably already know this, you have to have this special license, and they're very difficult to get. And part of our business, which I'm sure we'll touch on, is we actually have to convert dollars into crypto and then back out to dollars in order to leverage some of our technology. And so Colorado's been pretty proactive when it comes to blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Man, it's fascinating to me how much further along other countries are with leveraging blockchain specific to the real estate industry. I read a case study in the UK. HMLR, Her Majesty's Land Registry, did a case study with, or did a pilot, excuse me, with Cosense. Did I pronounce it right? Cosense? I'm always worried about the pronunciation. Cosense, the co-founder of Ethereum that started Cosense.
Consensus, yeah.
Cosense, that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear about the pilot they did in the UK?
I know that they're doing a bunch. Which one was this one?
So they essentially digitized the real property records for HMLR, which is kind of like the deed records registry. Stands for Her Majesty's Land Records. It's kind of like their municipality or, country's, land bank, if you will, where like deeds of record are stored and where people can, find out about properties. And so they basically tokenized these, real property records, and gave them assigned a token to them. It seems like that's going to be in the US, that's going to be the first step for us to, I think, be able to move into leveraging blockchain more. Is we got to get the government, on board from a property records perspective to digitize all of the real property records. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's funny because I come from the commercial industry, and I've been learning a lot about, residential, but also title. So we're talking to a couple of pretty significant title companies right now. And what I've learned is that they actually have more in terms of historical data than a lot of these municipalities. One great example is out here in Colorado in Aspen. The municipality goes back to about 1928. That's the furthest record it goes back in terms of property. And then there is a pretty significant title company out here that goes back all the way into the late 1800s because it's been a family-run operation, and they haven't shared a lot of this information with the local municipality, and they're actually able to use it. They're able to sell this data to larger title companies that come in and do real estate deals within the town. So it's pretty fascinating how it works.
Yeah, so what you're referencing are what are called title plants. And so all across the country, these title plants have, deed record data. If you think about each property like having a family tree, they have, like for example, in the state of Texas, before the state of Texas joined the United States, there's title plants in Texas that have deed record data all the way back to when Texas was a republic. And so these title plants, some of them are title company owned, some of them are, these individual entities that sign licensing deals with title agencies to be able to create what are called run sheets, which is like, think of like a Excel file that like references like volume and page number of like, the actual document that like shows the ownership stake in the property. And so they imagine like, again, an Excel file on this, a list of all these documents, that like that's in some way affect the property depending on, who was attached to it, liens and releases of liens, and maybe before the property was subdivided, things of that nature, like a big family tree on Excel. And that's, yeah, you're right. That's who controls most of the data is these title plants.
I agree with you though. Getting that information onto the blockchain is definitely the first step. It's for us, we're not doing it as a business, but we're doing it because if you think about, any property, right? If you have a physical address, 123 Apple Street in, Austin, Texas, it can only live in Austin, Texas. You can't replicate that dirt. But in the digital world, that can live on Zillow or LoopNet or, any CRM, and it can have conflicting attributes, conflicting data sets. One says 3 beds, the other says 2 beds. And there's no way to reconcile that unless you have a human go and look at all these websites and say, hey, okay, let's try to figure out, does this have 3 beds or 2 beds? So, but if you put an identifier on the blockchain, say Ethereum, for example, and you basically link it intrinsically to the physical address. So 123 Apple Street is linked to this string of characters on the blockchain. Because that's a global database and it's uncorruptible, now if 123 Apple Street is linked to that and you're using that information across disparate databases, you can link it together. So there's a way to actually go out and use stuff like machine learning or something similar. So you can say, hey, that says 3 beds, that says 2 beds. What's the real data? Let's call the municipality's database. Municipality says there was a 3rd bedroom added yesterday or last week or last month, and it's got 3 beds. And then you give it a nice little check mark so the data is accurate. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a very important step.
So Stephen, I did a terrible job introducing you. You started a technology platform called Imbrex. And did I pronounce that right? Imbrex, Imbrex?
Yep, that's right.
And you guys are helping, basically, its primary focus is in commercial real estate. Is that accurate? Or do you also see do you see you guys expanding into residential?
So it's an interesting story. I started in commercial because that's more of my background. My dad is a developer. And so that's where I started. But we sort of got pivoted into residential through demand. Our first partnership was with Toll Brothers. And so that was a real education for me into how the residential industry works, the MLS system, very, very different, as you know, than commercial. And it was created originally to give people control of their data. meaning in the commercial industry, we were giving our data to third-party portals, much like, you know, residential has these. The problem was, as soon as we gave it to them, they would charge us a subscription fee and continue to raise them because we were giving them basically all of that control. And if we wanted to send out a mass syndication, let's say, and change the price, it just wasn't easy because all of these different portals spoke different languages. So the original idea was we created a protocol that says, you know, hey, Chris, this is 123 Apple Street. And then I'll give you a residential example. Your firm owns that data. And if you're going to send it to the MLS, well, what you're doing is you're taking that information, you're encrypting it, locking it on the blockchain by encryption. You take those keys and then you say, hey, MLS here in Austin, MLS here in Dallas, I want to populate this data. And so then they could pull that data from this source. And so rather than have a large company like Zillow give you national exposure, you could go and pick which MLS you want to populate your data. And you wouldn't have to give them control. The MLSs, though, that's been an education as well, because those guys, they say they're technology companies, but they're definitely not.
Yeah. So you had a real estate brokerage and you did development projects, things like that. That's where you got started. And then you saw this opportunity on the technology front. How did you learn on the fly, like how to build a technology platform? Like what did that process look like? And to follow up on that, something else I was just curious about is what is your relationship with Rex versus Imbrex? So those two, like the same thing, two different businesses you're running? What's the story with that? Sorry, that's two questions in one. Just things that I've been curious about.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So how I got into it is I've been around just tech for quite a long time. I was doing some coding on the side. My dad was an engineer before he crossed over to development work. So I've been around computers and things like that. And I had been trying to build a solution for two things with our business. One was the ownership of the data, just an easier way for us to just populate it out, get as much exposure as possible, as fast as we can, make sure it's accurate. The second thing is we had a lot of money coming in. I'm sure you do this as well. It's usually in check form, and you hold it on behalf of a depositor. It's idle cash. Nobody's really monetizing that. And Wall Street's been trying to figure that out for a long time, but it's a hard problem to solve because everybody's using different systems. So
you're referencing the escrow deposits.
Precisely, yeah.
Like for like earnest money and things like that, when people make a deposit as their good faith to move forward with the contract on a property.
Yep.
So it's that. What would you estimate like the value of, escrow? Something I should share with you as context is I actually owned a title company. I started a title agency from the ground up, and I sold it 2 years ago. So I'm very familiar with the title business. Our earnest money deposits, were in hundreds of thousands, and we're just one little peon. So like nationally, like what do you think that number is?
It's hundreds of billions nationally, and it's if you take into rent and you sell everything else, it's trillions of dollars worldwide. It's a lot of money that's locked up, just sitting there. And usually it's the banks that are earning some kind of a return on that, not the title companies, not the real estate developer. So it's been a good business model for them. But along comes Ethereum, and it was sort of kill two birds with one stone. It was, hey, we can both create this protocol, own our data, and we can leverage smart contracts so that we can put money into a smart contract, and then we can either borrow against or invest those funds into derivatives. So I'll speak to that in just a moment on how that operates. But so I started building this out, and how I did it was just pretty much how anybody would start any other company. Research. Reddit was a great resource early on because there wasn't a lot of information on blockchain. And it's interesting because this whole COVID thing really taken the virtual world and accelerated it forward because, in the technology industry, everybody pretty much works remote. Everything's virtual. But now you have all these other industries that are a bit more conservative jumping in. And so it's pushing this whole movement towards digitization, which is speeding up sort of, I guess, the blockchain ecosystem as well, which is good. So we started building this out and we presented it in Shanghai a couple of years back, got some interest from investors, and it just kind of snowballed from there. But
How much
to your
money
question
did you
about
raise?
the two companies, so we raised initially, all in about $2.5 million.
How are you getting by? Like,
And
when you're building the business at the beginning, like, you as the CEO and founder, like, you've got to have a source for income, just personal income, pay your bills. Is your real estate company still running, and that's, kind of what is helping you get by? Or is it or are you taking a salary from your startup?
Yeah, so initially I was still slinging deals. I was that helped in the early days, and then I got into mining, which is a way in blockchain. You're basically providing resources, getting paid for that. So I was able to earn some income there, and just through some other side projects. And then after we raised a bit of capital, I was able to pay myself a salary, which worked out.
So mining is very difficult to do profitably nowadays. Were you doing this like several years ago when the payouts were higher?
Yeah, I was doing it, and it depends on the currency that you're doing it with. So I started with something called Zcash, and the infrastructure, the mining rigs back then weren't that expensive, and my electricity costs weren't that much either. So between those two variables, plus Zcash spiked, so I got kind of lucky after I mined a little bit of it. So yeah, today though, you can make money. It just depends on what you're mining. Mining Bitcoin, probably not. Mining Ethereum, you can for a couple $1,000. It's just your returns maybe a couple years out. And then there's other coins that are being developed that you can still mine that do pay off.
Something I wrote this down because I don't want to forget this. You reference smart contracts. So there's a lot of people that are going to hear this podcast, and smart contracts are a pretty fascinating thing specific to real estate. Can you, kind of like simplistically explain like how, like the use cases of smart contracts and the dynamics of them?
Yeah. You think of, I'll start with just the database itself, right? So most people listening to this, they work for an organization or maybe they use Dropbox or, Amazon Web Services, whatever they use for their own website to host that. It's owned by a company or a corporation. As I'm sure many people know, the blockchain is not owned by a single entity. It's a group of people that are mining and that are keeping the infrastructure around the world up. And so it's sort of this unbiased pool where you can store digital information, and it's a community that keeps it up. And to use it, you don't pay subscription fees. You pay small transaction fees. They're sort of like micro transaction fees. So within this decentralized database that's not owned by anybody, you can do what are called smart contracts. And a smart contract is really a similar idea in that it's a piece of code, but it's just a piece of code or a contract between, let's say, Stephen and Chris, that can do something on our behalf. So I can tell it, hey, I'm going to send this smart contract some money and don't release those funds until A, B, C, and D happen. So we abide by things in the contract, or until a certain date is met, or until, let's say that you and I don't trust each other, Chris, we don't know each other. And I'm going to put up $1,000 for you to perform a service for me. So it's a deposit, so you know that I'm good for the money, but I'm afraid you're just going to take off with my deposit. Well, we can have we can put this into a smart contract, and we can write rules. Hey, do not give that $1,000 to Chris until Chris performs the service that's in this contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so would you say like a really simplistic way of like thinking about smart contracts is like if you're a broker or an agent out there, for example, and you've got your traditional like standardized contract, it's basically like a digitized version of that contract. And when I say digitized, it's not a PDF copy of it. It's basically taking that contract and putting it in code and putting it on this decentralized network like Ethereum, for example, with with different if-then scenarios specific to that transaction. Is that a fair assessment of like how to describe it?
Yeah, and a good example of that, you had a title company. The way we built Escrow Commons is so that you have a depositor and a recipient in a sale of a transaction. You have a title company who usually takes custody of those funds. Hey, send me a check.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now the depositor can send those funds. They're stored in the contract. The title company never has to take custody. They don't have to open up bank accounts. They don't have to, they can manage it all in one place. And then to release the funds, all they have to do is either push it forward or push it backward. And what that gives them the ability to do as a corporation is if you have enough of these deals happening around the country or the world, you can basically aggregate all those deposits and then you can invest them. You can monetize that idle money. And so that's what's really interesting to me. It's going to be some time before people actually are able to do it, but it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool feature.
What I know we're bouncing around a lot, so man, I have so many things I wanted to talk to you about. On the fundraising side, have you raised any additional rounds since that first round? And if
We
so,
have not. We're in the process though of actually we're getting ready to sign a term sheet this week with a great firm, and so there'll be more coming out in the coming months.
got it. Okay. And something else I wanted to ask about is, are you familiar with it's blockemo.ch, immo.ch, blockemo.ch. It's an investment.
I haven't heard of them.
Yeah, so I found in I guess the first ever property to trade using the blockchain happened in Switzerland, and it was on a platform called blockemo.ch, blockimmo.ch, a property called the Zephyr, and it all happened on the Ethereum network. You can take the property token, right, that token, and put it in etherscan.io, and you can pull up the transaction, and then you see the security token that represents each owner's interest in the property, and then you also see the token for like the actual record of the title. Property is called the Zephyr, and anyways, it's a really cool example of how it was used. So anyways, just curious if you had heard about that. And then something else I asked about earlier was the Rex versus Imbrex. Like, what's the difference between those two?
So we have two companies. We have one here in the U.S. and one in Zug, Switzerland. The company in Zug, Switzerland is Rex, and it owns the IP, and it was set up originally because my partner, when we first kicked things off, was he lives in Sydney, Australia. I ended up buying him out. We didn't build a company to start a company. It was more of a project that sort of got legs quickly. And so we found Zug is a very proactive place for what we were trying to do. And the Ethereum Foundation is also headquartered there. And so that's what Rex is, as opposed to our parent company here in the US, Stab Central.
Cool. It's fascinating how everything's in Switzerland, but I mean, I guess it makes sense because, I mean, it is the one country everybody thinks of in terms of like where to go hide your money per se. And not to say decentralization, hides people's money, but in fact, it actually makes things, it can make things more transparent, but still probably more challenging for the governments to track down where your money's invested without, of course, filling out tax forms and, being transparent with them.
Yeah, the funny thing is that a lot of people thought that, Bitcoin and all this crypto was anonymous, and it's quite the opposite. I can deal in dollars and get away with that all day long, but I think there's going to be some repercussions with people in the future that aren't paying their taxes, because it's not hard for the government or anybody else to say, I mean, you can, to Zcash, they sort of anonymize transactions a bit. They make it a bit more difficult. But I mean, with a lot of these other cryptocurrencies, there's a digital breadcrumb that lead right to the source. So yeah, it's kind of ironic, because the movement started with Bitcoin, that it's sort of a liberty movement and it's very anonymous, when it's actually quite the opposite.
When you were in Midtown Manhattan, did you collaborate with the Winklevoss twins?
We've spoken to them because they have something called the Gemini dollar. And we need to convert, when a depositor puts up, let's say, a $5,000 deposit, that has to be converted into crypto so that it can be stored in a smart contract. Dollars can't be stored there. And we need a stable coin. It can't oscillate. It can't be volatile. And so we had spoken to the company not too long ago, actually. And we've spoken to a few more since, but they have a solid exchange, and they've been really good about compliance. And back to the BIT license, they're one of the very few that were able to obtain it and trade crypto in New York.
And so for people watching this, Gemini is a cryptocurrency exchange where you can buy and sell crypto. It's kind of like Coinbase, right? Or I'm sorry, is it not Coinbase? CoinDesk? Did I say that right?
No, Coinbase, and it's just as good. They run it's a great exchange.
Yeah, Coinbase. I have Coinbase on my cell phone. Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, there's been a lot. There's been what's another one? Starts with a K. Kraken.
Yep.
That one seems to be growing too.
Yep.
So what's Imbrex's? You mentioned Toll Brothers, a national home builder. What's like? What are your customers look like right now? How many do you have? How many transactions are you guys doing? Like, what's the annual revenue of the company look like?
So we started with data, and that was Imbrex. I actually went to CMLS, talked to a lot of the multiple listing services once we entered into the residential sphere, and it's very politically charged. And I think the data is going to take some time to work itself out. We've got some customers right now that are leveraging the protocol, and it's been successful. And we're talking to a pretty well-known international software company about helping us deploy this infrastructure. However, or I should say in parallel, we just released what we call Escrow Commons. And Escrow Commons, it has a data component, but it focuses on the escrow we just talked about. And so basically taking a $60 in wire fees down below $10. And so between a depositor, recipient, and we have this idea of a transaction manager, which could be a title agent, could be a landlord. And so right now we're focused on Escrow Commons. We've got a couple of commercial firms, one residential that we're speaking to, and then a couple of banks that we're running pilots with. And then we've launched it live. You can go to escrowcommons.io so people can see it on mainnet. But we'll be announcing some of these partnerships in the coming months. And our main customers, as I mentioned, they're mostly commercial and mostly title to start. And then throughout the rest of this year, we'll pick up some banking customers as well.
So what's the revenue for y'all's business look like? And what's your fee structure and all that?
So our fee structure is $9 a transaction. So anytime that anybody's going to, let's say, sell a house, we define that as a transaction, and that's launching one of these escrow contracts. So we take that $60, we bring it down to $9. And so our revenue, we haven't talked about that publicly, but it's our projections look good. And ironically, the COVID experience, it was not good, obviously, for the whole world. And through a weird twist of events, sort of catapulted what we're doing forward, because people are looking for a secure way to process escrow payments. And as I'm sure you're well aware, wire fraud, especially in the residential industry, it's seriously a problem. It's a problem in commercial as well. And so this takes out, it mitigates a lot of that risk. And it also, when we talk about the pricing, bringing down the wire fees, 4 or 5x, we really have been able to get the attention of, the title companies, but also a couple of commercial firms.
So typically, like in a transaction, when you get the closing disclosure, when you go to close on the property, the title company will, or whatever you're using, attorney, law office, whatever, will have all the fees on there that you pay as a consumer, right? Which includes indirectly wire fees. So it's the cost gets passed on to the consumer, right? So
Right.
is it basically like, this basically is a strategy for title companies, for example, to charge the same amount of money and increase their net profit per deal?
It's a way for them to do that, but they also are reducing a lot of the back office operations that they have. So human capital is pretty big with a lot of, well, actually every real estate, whether you're commercial or residential, humans are a big expense.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't getting rid of, half their workforce, but as you know, everything that's done within the blockchain is tracked. And so we're able to basically take all of that data and populate everything that they would need for compliance, for their own storage requirements. And so it trims both of those down enough where it's a pretty attractive endeavor.
Steve, what have been some of y'all's biggest roadblocks to growth to date? Like, what have been some of your biggest challenges from a growth perspective?
I'll answer that in just a moment, but one thing I left out too, and this is something that I've learned through title companies, because that wasn't my business. Many of these larger title companies own banks, and they are investing portions of those into things like treasuries, but they're not able to get all the franchisees because they're using different banks. They can't force them to use their bank, especially because those deals are coming from outside brokers. Buyers want to use, whoever they want to use. And so what they can do now is nationally or internationally is they can grab those deposits and they can invest them not in treasuries, they don't even need to go through their own bank, but they can invest them in synthetic derivatives. So things like synthetic oil or synthetic gold or synthetic Apple stock. It tracks the real world price of those equities and commodities. And they can exit those trades natively, meaning right in one place. They don't have to call TD Ameritrade. It's not linked to the NASDAQ or to the New York Stock Exchange. It's an international product that they control and that they can liquidate at any time. Our biggest challenge to answer that question has been education. So especially with the data, when you tell people, hey, we're going to help you own your data, nobody knows what that means, because no one's ever owned their digital information. We go onto Facebook, we like a comment or we write a blog post, and those corporations, their stock value goes up, but we don't see that. We just get, a shot of endorphins. So that's why Facebook and Google and a lot of those companies are pivoting towards blockchain, because they see the writing on the wall. Hey, if users own their data, well, they're going to control that information. So in the 2020 or 2024 election, rather than, the Clinton campaign trying to say, hey, Chris, can we get your name, your address, from Facebook, they're going to have to actually get it from you. That's the way technology is going. So imagine, Chris, you're able to monetize your own data instead of Facebook or Google doing that. Instead of them making $15,000 per user a year, you get to pocket, maybe not that much, but even 5,000 of that would be nice. Now, they also get to collect transaction fees. So the business model for them grows quite a bit. So that's why they're really moving pretty quick. Explaining this though to anybody in any industry, hey, you're going to own your data, is like trying to explain the internet, you know, in the early days. It hasn't happened yet. In 5 years from now, everybody will just expect it. But because it doesn't exist really yet, it's been a big challenge for us. So yeah, hands down, that would be it.
I mean, blockchain, relatively speaking, is a very immature industry. And, I think, the use cases, people are having some great success, but there's, like in the United States, God, there's so much bureaucracy and, between like just dealing with like land property records, like turning those into a token and, just, yes, teaching the education of the community. There's like, you got big companies like Fidelity that make $1 billion+ for their, the title side of their business, their underwriting fees and things like that. And, a lot of people don't want to be disrupted, and, and it's not exactly in the wheelhouse of an agent or a broker to understand or learn this. So, you are early to the game, to say the least, which is a good thing. But yeah, it's also tough because, it's like, I think once you explain it to somebody, it clicks, but like, how do you scale your messaging so that, people buy into what it is you're offering?
Yeah, so I've learned not to bring up the word blockchain at all. And what's interesting is that a lot of this stuff is happening under the hood, but the blockchain is a lot further than many people think. The Federal Reserve they've got a pretty significant project underway, and the BIS in Switzerland, the Bank of International Settlements, a lot of central banks around the world, they don't talk about it. They started to talk about it actually a little bit, but you don't really see it as commonplace when you pick up your local news or whatever it may be. So and Tesla actually, they're beyond a pilot. They're using this infrastructure for their supply chain management. Again, not making a lot of noise. So I think what's going to happen, and it's already happening actually, so I don't think I know, people are just going to be using this, not knowing or caring that they're using it. And they'll, in some junctions, they'll ask why maybe things are happening. I don't think most people will though. I think most people will just, hey, if it works better, I don't really care. I don't care how this video is giving us the ability to talk. It just is, right? Most people don't want to look under the hood. So,
Steve, do you
education.
what do you need help at all on the integration side? Is there anything you need help with on the integration side? Just generally speaking?
Integration, you mean
To like to the real estate world, like to, like for example, title companies use RandQuest, SoftPro, or a new up and comer is Quelia. And then on the transaction management side, what brokers use are, like Skyslope, Dotloop, Brokerment, things like that, where, it's like they are keeping track of, or Lone Wolf, that's a big one, keeping track of, like, for example, in states where the broker is responsible for depositing escrow, are there any like use cases to help you from an integration perspective, like being able to tie into all those systems?
Yeah, so that's how we designed the product. It has a front end so people can see it, but how it's really designed is so that we don't want to come in here with a wrecking ball and say, hey, we're gonna be sort of the Salesforce of escrow services. What we're trying to do is really plug into those services that you're talking about, and we've had conversations with probably a good majority of the ones you just mentioned. And so it just depends on the client. If we go into, a national broker and they have franchises all over the United States, they all may be using different components. And so for us, where's our entry point? Where do we plug in? Are we plugging in with a broker's CRM system? Is it on their payments function, something with like Plaid? And with everybody, it's been somewhat different. For us, it's dynamic. It's been built dynamic enough where we can plug it in pretty much anywhere.
So one of the biggest challenges in the real estate industry from an integration perspective is like nobody wants to build and maintain the bridge between APIs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like none of these vendors want to do that. And they have like 30, 40, 50 different companies that want to integrate with them. So for most people that watch this, I think most people know this. I'm one of the biggest investors and largest stakeholders in an integration platform. And they could essentially get you connected overnight to every CRM, transaction management platform, et cetera. They developed this thing called a common model. And once they create a connector to your API, they can then build the bridge very quickly to all of these other systems that they already have connectivity to. I think it may help you accelerate all of your integration needs with Imbrex.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about them.
I think they have about 600 different brokerages across the country on the platform paying customers right now.
That's great. Nice.
It's called RealSync, RealSynch.
I will definitely check them out. That's great.
So you've got a term sheet or you're about to get one, like whether it's me or there's lots of people that watch this that are investors, like how much are you seeking in investment to take the business to the next level?
We'll call it a Series A, and that capital will help us take what's been a very small team, but productive, and grow out. It'll help us build out the executive branch a bit, but also facilitate some of the demand that we haven't been able to satisfy because we've been small. On the escrow side, like I said, in the last 2 months, it's been crazy, and we don't want to turn people away. So we need to take what we've already built and we need to configure it so that it can scale, not just for title, but so that it can scale across the different industry verticals, mortgage, underwriting, brokerage. And so that's what the next leg of this will look like. And it'll take about 24 months.
How much money are you guys hoping to raise?
Well, I'm not going to talk about that publicly just because we are about to release this initial term sheet. But I mean, if people are interested, I'm happy to provide information. You can reach out to me and we can talk about it.
Okay. So is the escrow commons is like is that like a derivative product of Imbrex, or is it, like when I went to the Imbrex website, it kind of shows you the architecture of the platform. Is like, can you buy each of those individually? And is escrow commons one of them, or is escrow commons the product that seems to be taking off out of that, architecture of systems?
So Imbrex is free, and it's really it's a way that the way companies are using it today is, hey, I'm XYZ company, I'm in Chicago, but I've got offices, in Seattle, California, Florida. Some of our systems may not be talking to each other, so we're literally sending PDFs and purchase and sale agreements via email. It's really under the hood of Imbrex. It's to plug it into those systems and get them to talk to each other so that it doesn't have to be sent via PDF. If we're using 2 different CRMs, well, I want to be able to send that data and then pull it through my CRM and not have to manually do data entry. And so Imbrex, the public facing that you see, it looks like a portal. The reason we did that is we got requests from some of the clients that were using the protocol. And they said, hey, since we've already got data going through the protocol, why don't you provide a public facing application so that we can show these listings to the public and maybe get leads? And the whole thought process there was, well, look, if you guys, decide to put ads or things like that, well, we're just going to revoke our keys because they control their data. But it's a free product. Escrow Commons is where we actually monetize what we've built. And through Escrow Commons, inevitably, you're negotiating a contract. You've got diligence information. So naturally, there'll be data that's exchanged there. But rather than have to talk about, hey, you own your data, people understand money. So we say, look, here's an escrow product and it's going to lower your costs. And then when they start trading their data back and forth and they see that it's interoperable between systems and that they control it, sort of icing on the cake.
You touched on this earlier, but so you guys are converting the dollars people are using as like for earnest money, for example, converting that into a stable coin, or it's a cryptocurrency that's not going to have the crazy volatility. And then that is being stored. Whose wallet is that being stored in? Just so for people that are watching this that don't know anything about cryptocurrency, I feel like really quickly I just need to explain it. A wallet is like literally like a billfold, except in digital form, where you can like store your cryptocurrency, or one of these guys, right? This is a piece of hardware that can store crypto. So where's you guys are converting the earnest money into crypto, and then whose digital wallet is it stored in?
So it's stored in a smart contract. So it's stored on the blockchain, not a wallet. But the person that controls the movement of those funds, so that's the transaction manager. Think of a title agent.
Mm-hmm.
The title agent doesn't take custody of the funds. They are not putting it in their own bank account, but those funds need to move from the smart contract either to the recipient or back to the depositor, depending on how the deal goes. And so the transaction manager, the title agent, can either move the funds whichever way they need to go without actually having to hold them. You could just do it. You could program it so that you wouldn't need that third party. But in real estate, things change so much that I don't think you could ever. It would be difficult to write a contract to account for all those variables.
So I'm confused. So it's stored on the blockchain, your earnest money. So I thought the money had to be stored in a wallet. So like, how is it stored in the smart contract?
So the way that cryptocurrency works is you actually never store your cryptocurrency. What you store is the keys to your cryptocurrency. So if you own a Bitcoin right now, you actually don't have that Bitcoin. It's on the blockchain, but you have the key to unlock it. You're the only one that has that key to unlock that and then transfer it to somebody else, where it still lives on the blockchain, but you're just giving the key to that to somebody else. So you're never actually holding that currency in a wallet. You're the person that can control who owns it next. And so that's really what we're doing. That money, that crypto, that deposit is on the blockchain, and it's a transaction. And the title agent is the one that has the key that unlocks it, either gives it back to the depositor or forward to the recipient. Now, when they need to be converted back into dollars, well, that crypto, the crypto that we're using, gets erased. It's basically no longer in existence, and it goes back into, or it's exchanged for dollars and cents, but it goes back into dollars. We exchange it back into dollars, and then it goes into the depositor's account. So a wallet is like a wallet where you hold your dollars in the physical world. The difference being, imagine your wallet's empty and you really just have a key to a safety deposit box at the bank.
Great. Just learned something new. I just got this in the mail a couple weeks ago.
They're great. Yeah. I highly suggest anybody that buys crypto, get one of those.
I've never actually bought crypto. But it's like, man, it's so fascinating how blockchain can like literally disrupt the entire title industry. I mean, like, people keep talking about like disruption in residential real estate brokerage. There's no disruption. It's like people just creating a better mousetrap. Like real legit disruption can happen in title using blockchain. Like one of the questions that came to my mind was like, Fidelity, $1 billion, massive company, and they make a ton of money in title. I mean, it seems like they would not want, your platform to be successful, right? Because like they want all of those money in deposit in their bank account.
No, they do want us to be successful, and they want to own a piece of it, and they want to monetize the funds that flow through those digital pipes, because it'll take their current massive earnings and inflate it even more.
Well, I mean, they want to buy. It seems like they would be a natural candidate for someone to buy you and pay you a very pretty multiple and make you very rich.
That would be nice. Fidelity, if you're living, I mean, if you're listening, please give me a call.
They made an offer to buy my title company. We ended up selling it they're one of the largest privately held title companies in the state of Texas. But I know, very connected in that world. But yeah, it seems like a bank or a title company is like gonna snatch you guys up as soon as you gain some more momentum.
Yeah, they have good business models, and they're suited well for this technology. That's for sure.
Stephen, what are some resources where people can go online to like start learning about blockchain and like use cases for real estate? Like, what are things where do you go to learn and read? Where would you recommend people go to just kind of start down this path, if you will, of education?
Sure. So I don't know, Reddit, it may be kind of odd to suggest, but in terms of like cryptocurrency and blockchain, it is actually a good resource. And so for people that don't use Reddit, it's really just how would you explain, like a board where people can post articles, they can have conversations, things like that. But beyond that, there's CoinDesk. So there are publications, CoinDesk and Cointelegraph.
YouTube, I think, is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, YouTube. Yeah, of course. YouTube's a big one. So those are, I would say all of those would be good.
What's been like one of the greatest things you've learned as you transition from, running a real estate brokerage to building a software company? What's like some thing that in your mind is like some superpower you developed in that transition that you're like, man, if I had known this when I was running that real estate company, we would have, gone to like, the next level, like from a leadership perspective as a CEO, like what is that?
What I've learned is that, coming from the real estate industry, so this may not be the case everywhere, but it's very competitive, right? And that rings true to the technology that everybody uses. And that's what bifurcates all of this communication. It makes it less efficient for everybody, but to get everybody on board is very, very difficult. And, what I've learned is that it's hard to do that on a small scale. And it seems difficult when you think about trying to get the larger organizations on board with such a change, but it's actually not. And it's actually, it is hard to build a company. I'm sure many people, are building companies, you have a company, but it's not impossible either. And so these things that seem so crazy, whether it's real estate and then transitioning into technology, which may be a domain you're not doing every day, if you spend the time, if you hustle, just like you hustle in what you're doing, and you keep pushing, then just like anything else, everything sort of comes together. And I've gotten a hell of an education in the residential industry and how the infrastructure works. And the infrastructure is a mess, but it's also really nice because it's kind of like the timing works well. Forget about us. But these technologies, they call them Web3. There's more than just blockchain, but it's going to solve so many problems in the real estate industry. And there's so many exciting things that are happening that anybody's going to be able to own a piece of real estate. It's going to be a lot more efficient to get loans. The paperwork is going to drop precipitously. I think the brokerage industry is going to change. I don't think brokers are going to go away. I just think everything is going to change. And I think there is a lot of opportunity, and some people get scared about that, but I wouldn't be afraid of that. I would embrace that. And the people that embrace it will do really well.
So would you say the superpower is basically to just like double down on like embracing new technology and learning, like how to create competitive advantages? Is that what you're getting to in terms of like
pretty much.
kind of superpower?
Yeah. I mean, and people in real estate, I mean, brokers are agents. Good agents are like some of the most motivated people in the world, right? They're just energetic and 24/7, and they have great energy about themselves. And so if they can if you can expand outside of that a little bit into different things and embrace things like technology, you do really well.
Steven, hey, don't hang up. But guys, thanks for tuning in to CEO Secrets. I feel like my ADD and ADHD is like, so this is probably like one of the best displays of how bad my ADD is, because like I found your company, Steven, online, and like I was trying to understand what all you were involved in. And I had so many random questions, and you've been probably you've been one of the guests I've been most excited to talk with, because there's not a lot of people in this space that I've found. It's not like super, like in the CRM space and like all these, it's like so crowded. And so like, you're in this very emerging technology space, and it's super fascinating. So I appreciate you being on CEO Secrets. And for anybody watching this, you should definitely, if you want to stay ahead of the curve, you should go check out Imbrex, which is like the portal to find listings, for example, and things of that nature. And then escrowcommons.io. And then what's the best way for people to reach out to you, Stephen, if they have any follow-up questions?
Just shoot me an email, Steven@Imbrex.io.
Cool. All right. Thanks again for being on CEO Secret, Stephen. This is very insightful.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.